Again, it's good to see everybody here today and on this wonderful day. Today's sermon is going to be a little different. There is a very important event that took place 500 years ago that is still affecting us today. And that is the Reformation. On October 31st of 1517, a monk by the name of Martin Luther nailed to the church doors a list of 95 theses, or 95 accounts, statements that were attacking the Catholic Church, which was what he belonged to anyhow. As a monk, he was a member of the Catholic Church, as a priest and everything as well. And part of it stems from this verse found in Ephesians 2, verse 8. For it is by grace you have been saved through faith. And this not from yourselves, it is the gift of God. As he was studying that verse and reflecting on how the church, the Catholic Church at that time, was teaching, he felt these were in conflict, because the church was preaching salvation was basically through the church. You know, you've got to do penance, which is atone for sins. You've got to be baptized, you've got to be confirmed into church, observe the Eucharist, or as we call it, the Lord's Supper. They had a list of things you have to do, and for penance, when you go into confession, the priest would say so many numbers of Hail Marys, which is to be a prayer to Mary, asking for her to use some of her items, some of her grace that she had built up to absolve you of your sins. Well, back in 1517, and actually earlier, the church had a practice that they called selling of indulgences. These indulgences were designed so that you didn't have to do penance. Penance was to reduce your time in purgatory, which the Catholics believed is between earth and heaven. When you die, you go into purgatory to be cleansed of all your sins before you can get into heaven and be made righteous. And when this particular event took place, Pope Leo and the Archbishop of Mainz, which is in Germany, had come up with the plan to sell indulgences because, one, Pope Leo was in the middle of building St. Peter's Basilica that we now have in Rome. They were building it. And Pope Leo also liked to throw big, lavish parties, go on hunting trips, and basically all the money the church had at that time was running out. And he needed a way to raise money to finish building the church. And also the archbishops, a lot of them, they would buy their office. They would pay so much money to the church, and whoever gave the most money is the one that was awarded the title of Archbishop of whatever location. And so the Archbishop of Mainz had to took a loan out from a banking family, and he had to pay that loan back, and so he needed money. Pope Leo and this Archbishop conferred, and Pope Leo said, okay, sell indulgences and we'll split the money in half. You take half to pay for what you want, and I'll take the rest to pay for the church, pay for St. Peter's. And so then they get this another pope, or not pope, but another priest by the name of Johann Tetzel. And he had these, and it's probably with the approval of Pope Leo and the Archbishop, to set up, to print out these pieces of paper, notices, saying that the person named below on whatever date, because they were actually forms and they had a place you put a date in and the name of a person, would be absolved of sins and reducing the amount of time they would have to spend in purgatory. And supposedly, some of the stuff I was watching on YouTube and on TV this week, preparing for this, they said that you could even go as far as get absolution for violating the Virgin Mary. If you could even do that. You know, I don't know how they worked it out or anything, but you would be absolved of all those sins, and you would be reduced on your time in purgatory. And you could even go so far as buy enough indulgences that you would be able to skip purgatory and go straight to heaven. And well, the verse, and Luther had first started out as a lawyer, studying to be a lawyer. Because in the 1500s, there were basically three professions that you could make money with. First one was medical, being a doctor of medicine. Second one was being a lawyer and becoming judges and whatever. And then third was theologians, teaching at universities and teaching theology. And you've also got to remember, books were not plentiful at that time like we have today. I mean, every one of us has a book of some type in our house. And we've even got it down to where we can have who knows how many books on devices this small, or like a cell phone, you can get a book. So, the books that were available were few and far between, and they were usually housed in university libraries. And there was one day, the way I understand, Martin Luther was he was studying, and he saw this one big book. Turns out it was a Bible. Probably the first Bible he had ever seen. Complete Bible. Because most churches didn't even own a complete Bible. They just had parts of it. And so he got to studying it and reading it. And he decided to become a priest. And as he would continue studying and reading, he'd come across verses like I read here in Ephesians 2, verse 8, "For by grace ye are saved through faith. And it is not of yourselves. It is the gift of God, not by works." And he'd say, wait a minute. The church is telling me in order to be a good Christian, be a good member of the church, I've got to do all these works. That doesn't agree with what I'm reading here. And he would study and work it out. And then he heard about the sale of indulgences. And for him, and luckily the Lord of the Providence of Wittenberg, where Martin Luther was, did not allow Tetzel bring in and come in and sell the indulgences. But they were still affected by it because the people of the town would go across the river to where Tetzel was and buy the indulgences over there, outside of Wittenberg's realm. And And so once they had all these indulgences, they'd come back over and do whatever they wanted. Martin Luther would see them, and they would quit coming to confession and stuff, and Martin Luther would question them, why, how come you're not coming to confession and stuff anymore? They say, I don't need to go to confession, I've got this indulgence. And so they would show it to him. And would basically say, especially if they had one that said you could do whatever you want, you'd be totally free of purgatory, then he wouldn't even bother going back to church or to the confession. Martin Luther came up with his 95 Theses. And it was attack against the Pope and attack against the sale of indulgences. Now, he did not mean for it to turn into the Reformation like we can see in history. Because when he nailed stuff to the church doors, it was usually a sign saying, I want to debate this. And I want to debate with certain people, and if others want to come and debate, they can. Because he had written, the original theses were written in Latin. And the only people that knew Latin were the educated, the priests and possibly even lawyers and doctors. And when you posted a thing like that on the door, they would decide whether or not they'd want to go to it, but the general public wouldn't be involved with it because they didn't understand Latin, didn't know Latin, and so it was above their thinking. However, somebody had copied it down and translated it into German and other languages, and due to an invention that had been out a few years before is what actually sparked the Reformation. By them printing it in common language that everyday people could read and understand, people get going, you're right. And is the printing press, Gutenberg's printing press, which had just been invented a few years before this. And so they, by being able to use the printing press, word got around. It still took a while, but it was quicker than what it used to. Because used to, if you had to mail a letter to several different people, you had to write each one by hand. Same with books and Bibles. If a book was made, each one was copied, hand, letter by letter. Unlike today where we get these presses, we just got printers at the house that spits out a book in 10 minutes. If we get that bold enough to write a book. But Luther basically wanted to just debate these issues. He didn't want it to go into a Reformation. He wasn't even thinking about reforming the church. But because of the way he wrote the theses, his questions he wanted debated, and the way people read them, they took it as an attack on the Pope, which it is, and it was, and an attack on the church. And so they got all these out. And what got it started with Martin Luther is he actually mailed a copy to the Archbishop of Mainz saying, look, I want to debate this. Did you know about this? And of course he did, because he's the one that started it. And the church and the Archbishop were getting afraid that Luther was going to, and it did. It upset the church and upset the delicate balance of power. They were wanting to excommunicate him. I think they even wanted to go as far as killing him. But they held back off of that. But getting back to Johann Tetzel, he was a great salesman. And he probably came up with probably the first advertising jingle, if you could think, if we don't know for sure, but one of the things he would say in selling the indulgences is, when a coin in the coffer rings, a soul heavenward springs. So you drop money and you free a soul. And this particular set of indulgences were set up, not only could you buy it for yourself, but you could buy it for a deceased relative, saying that in case they didn't have enough time to absolve themselves of punishment from purgatory and stuff, you could buy the indulgence and free them from purgatory so they could go on into heaven. And then you could meet them in heaven instead of spending time in purgatory. And another one of the attacks, and this is attacking the Pope directly, Martin Luther is asking, if the Pope can go on and sell these indulgences so that people can be freed from purgatory, why doesn't he go on and just empty purgatory for free? You know, why doesn't he just go on and do it instead of collecting this money and getting paid to do it? And if you've studied history, or anything, one of the things that has always been said, follow the money. Kind of hate to bring it up, but you can see it here. Follow the money. What was the money being used for? And it was actually an abuse of money to save somebody else. But the general population didn't see everything until Luther spoke up. And then, thanks to the printing press, it spread. And even after Luther was excommunicated from the church, they put him into hiding because the church wouldn't protect him from being killed. And there was other lords and stuff that wouldn't protect him from being killed. He went into hiding for a few years. And he still studied, and he wrote pamphlets and everything. And then he eventually snuck back. He disguised himself and snuck back to Wittenberg and continued working there as a priest. And it's just interesting how all this is played out. But because of Luther speaking up at that time, we now have the ability, we see where it is grace through faith that we are saved, instead of having to do penance, do work, do good deeds to earn our salvation. You can't earn salvation. It's a gift. All you have to do is just hold your hands out and say, I receive the gift of salvation from Jesus. And that's it. You're in heaven. There's no purgatory or any other place between death from the time you die to get into heaven. You go to heaven. And thanks to Martin Luther and his careful study of the Word, he saw that. And he was able to bring it out and say to the church, you're wrong on this point. Here's what it's actually saying. And it upset the church, but oh well. But if it hadn't been for Luther, who knows where we'd be today when it comes to religion. We probably would have still been within the Catholic Church, doing penance, going to Mass, and observing the 7 sacraments that the Catholic Church says you need in order to get to heaven. There's baptism, which the Catholic Church used to practice. I'm not sure if they still do. I think they do. Infant baptism. There's confirmation. It's when you join the church. There's confession. There's your first Eucharist, first communion. And I know I'm missing a couple, but then there's matrimony, getting married, and then holy orders, if you felt called to become a nun or a priest. Now, they say that not everybody's is called to be a nun or a priest, but if you are, then that is the seventh, one of the sacraments to be observed in the church. And then there's one more, I can't remember exactly what it was. And the church still...
The last rites, Brother G.
Oh yeah, last rites, thank you. That's for when you die, or just right before you die, they give you last rites. And in order to get last rites and holy orders, and you had to be in good standing with the other sacraments also. In other words, you had to observe the other sacraments. And then the church, and I did a research last night, if they still did indulgences. And in a way they do. They still talk about purgatory and talk about indulgences, but they do not sell indulgences anymore. But they encourage you to do good works. See somebody in need, go provide for them in whatever they need. Then that act of providing, doing a good work for that person gets you X amount of time off of purgatory. Or if you make pilgrimages to certain churches, you observe certain relics. And relics are the bones, supposed to be the bones of saints from way back. Might be just a little chip of their bone, or a little piece of the original cross, or something like that. You know, or if you go and you make pilgrimages to certain churches, you walk up a certain set of stairs, which are supposed to be the stairs in Pilate's palace that Jesus walked up. You walk up them on your knees and you say the Lord's Prayer at each stomp. And there's one step that has a cross on it. You kneel down and you kiss that cross and you say the Lord's Prayer. Doing all of that gets you time off of purgatory. But they can't buy your time. You can't buy your time off anymore. And for us today, we don't have to do any of that. We just have to accept the gift of God, the gift of salvation, and that's it for heaven. We get to go to heaven. Now we still need to observe and not try not to sin. But we don't have to go to somebody and say, "Forgive me for I have sinned." We can just pray to God, say, "I'm sorry, I sinned. Help me to do better." And that's all we have to do. And thanks to Martin Luther, that's the start of it. And that's why October 31st, 1517 should be an important date in any Protestant church calendar. Because by his act of nailing these things to be debated, we are now able to freely worship and not have to depend on somebody else to tell us how to live and what to do. Except for the Bible. That's the only law book that we should have, besides man-made laws to get along with man, but for spiritual acts, the Bible is the final authority. And we need to listen to it, read it, and do what it says. And so as we get ready to come and sing our invitation, I'll be down front here to receive anybody that wants to join the church or become a Christian. Just feel free to come on down and we'll go from there.
Number 409.